Today is part 6 of the series, and we're going to move on to Christians are too political. As we wrap up this series, I want you to know that the Barna research that was done on this topic was put into a book. And if you want to learn more about how to change the narrative and to how to approach the misconceptions that people may have, that book is called Unchristian. It's written by David Kinnaman and Gabe Lyons, and I do have an extra copy of it that I'm probably going to put in the bookstore, but it's easy to find if you want to check that out and learn more about it. So we're going to wrap up the series today on the final of our 6 stereotypes. Before I do that, I want to share with you the scripture reading for today, found in Romans chapter 13. The Apostle Paul is writing to the church in Rome and says this: "Everyone must submit to governing authorities, for all authority comes from God, and those in positions of authority have been placed there by God. So anyone who rebels against authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and they will be punished. For the authorities do not strike fear in people who are doing right, but in those who are doing wrong. Would you like to live without fear of the authorities? Do what is right, and they will honor you. The authorities are God's servants, sent for your good. But if you are doing wrong, of course you should be afraid, for they have the power to punish you. They are God's servants, sent for the very purpose of punishing those who do what is wrong. So you must submit to them, not only to avoid punishment, but also to keep a clear conscience." Let's pray together. Lord, I do thank you for the way this sermon series has helped all of us to deal with the attitudes that people outside the church have for those inside the church. But help us, Lord, to find ways that we can change the narrative through love. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be pleasing to you, I pray, in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so if we were to go around and you were to tell me the source of your news, I can probably tell you whether you are more conservative or more liberal. Or if you were to tell me right now how you feel about Elon Musk, I could probably predict whether you are Democrat or Republican. Or how about what happened on Friday? What is your take on the Oval Office meeting on Friday between President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky? If you saw American strength, I predict that you voted for Trump. If instead you were embarrassed for our country, I predict that you did not vote for Trump. You see, our country has become so divided that we can all make these predictions. I'm not psychic. There's nothing special about anything. It's just that it's become easy to tell which side we're on. And there are good people of faith on both sides of these issues. And that's true for Christians and non-Christians alike. But today we're going to talk about the perception that non-Christians have of Christians, that Christians are primarily motivated by a political agenda. So let's take a look at that for a second. You know, the research shows that 75% of non-Christians think Christians are too political. In 2007, Barna asked people to name a leader associated with Christianity. Name a leader associated with Christianity. Jesus came in third, behind the Pope and behind then President Bush. A politician ahead of Jesus. Interesting. You might think that Bush made the list because they were thinking they had to answer with somebody from present-day Christianity, but consider this. In the same research, they were asked to name outspoken Christians in different fields of culture, including music and television and movies and sports and business and politics. And in that polling, non-Christians recognized Christians in politics more than any other sector of culture. Politics. Which begs the question, are Christians supposed to be engaged politically? The answer is yes, we are, but we're going to talk about what that means in a moment. You see, throughout history, Christians have made a concerted effort to engage in the political process in all times, in all places, and through all sorts of issues. The connection between faith and politics is inescapable. Well, unless you're at Thanksgiving dinner with me at my brother's house, where he has forbidden both topics during the holiday. He does let me say grace, though, so that's good. So let's be clear. I am not going to suggest today that we should neglect or ignore politics. The political arena is a crucial setting for influencing culture. Our faith should be evident in every dimension of our lives, including politics. The problem is that our political activism, if it's presented in an unchristian way, well, that can prevent other people from seeing Christ. So, the Bible doesn't have a lot to say about political activism, but it does have a lot to say about those who are put in authority over us in government. The Apostle Paul writes in his letter to the Romans, I read it just a moment ago, Romans 13:1, everyone must submit to governing authorities. For all authority comes from God, and those in positions of authority have been placed there by God. Okay, so the verse starts out with a very clear-cut command to submit to governing authorities. Doesn't seem to be unclear at all. But then it's followed by the rationale. The rationale is that because those authorities have been appointed by God, God ordained in some way. There's no wiggle room here for Christians when we read this verse. I mean, whether or not we agree with the leader's policies or politics, we must recognize that God has placed them in their position to govern over us. And I know what all you're thinking. Wait one second. What if they are just absolutely evil? I mean, what about somebody like Hitler? Or remember Franklin Pierce? I mean, our 14th president? I'm just kidding. I just wanted to throw out a random name. See if you're still with me. But, what do we do with someone like a Hitler? Paul is saying that believers do not need to fear governing authorities because it is God that appoints them. So what he's saying is, we'll look back at Daniel in the Old Testament. Daniel had to serve under King Nebuchadnezzar, one of the most evil kings in biblical history. But he understood that his God, not the king, was ultimately in control. That's what we see in Daniel 2:21. He says he, meaning God, controls the course of world events. And then it says he, meaning God, removes kings and sets up other kings. Daniel 2:21. We don't have to like our leaders, but we do have to treat them with respect out of reverence for their God-appointed position. And remember, when Paul was writing in Romans, that letter to the Romans, he wasn't in some sort of, governmental paradise. No, he was a subject of the Roman Empire. And one of those Roman emperors was Nero. You remember him. He was the guy who used to cover the Christians in oil and then put them out in his garden and set them on fire so they could be a human torch at night. That was Nero. And Paul is saying, respect our governing authorities. There's actually only one exception when believers are not to be subject to the governing authorities. And that is when those leaders try to force Christians to contradict the will of God. Now, we see this demonstrated in Acts chapter 4. You might remember the story where Peter and John have healed in Jesus' name, and they've been arrested and brought before the council. And in their trial, as recorded in Acts chapter 4, they are challenged as to why are they healing and preaching in Jesus' name, and then they are told that they are no longer to teach in Jesus' name. To which Peter and John respond, well, sorry about that. We must obey God rather than any human authority. So when governing authorities attempt to take the place of God by requiring behavior that conflicts with God's revealed will, then resistance is justified. That is how Dietrich Bonhoeffer justified his actions against Hitler. Hitler was forcing others to contradict the will of God. You may have heard of the Nazi Bible. He had the Bible rewritten so that it would promote his theology. It would strengthen his justification for war. It would lessen the importance of the Jews so that he could easily eliminate them. Hitler put the authority of the church under the state, and then, of course, began the systematic elimination of the Jews that resulted in over 6 million Jews being killed. All of those things. In light of all of those injustices, it's easy to see why Bonhoeffer decided, I will obey God rather than Hitler. And so, in light of those injustices too, I think too often today, Hitler's name is thrown around way too easily. But anyway, that's another thing. I want to share with you something that happened just this morning. As I was preparing to come here to worship, I received a text message from some folks in Africa. Some of you may know that we went through our disaffiliation process from the United Methodist Church a couple years ago, and it was relatively without incident. We had some debates and discussion, but no one was injured. That has not been the case in Africa. They were not allowed the same process as we experienced, and their process began last May. And it's been quite contentious. And some of you may have read news stories and articles about the conflict that has been taking place over there between the United Methodists and the Global Methodists. And it's often broken out into riots and violence. And so today, Dr. Jerry Kula, a colleague of mine in the Global Methodist Church, went to a church in Liberia to try to bring peace and end the conflict in the resulting conflict. A very political thing, a very political activity in Africa. He was arrested along with 72 others. So I got sent a picture of him in jail. They've been asking us to pray for Jerry and the others who were arrested today. Sometimes we think we've got it bad here. The way the politics and religion mix over there is nothing like here. And when pastors end up in jail, something's not right. So pray for Jerry Kula and those that are fighting the good fight in Africa. Let me go back to the question. The question there in the outline that I gave you said, are Christians supposed to be engaged politically? Are Christians supposed to be engaged politically? As I've said, we are supposed to be engaged. But in the same way that I encouraged us to be engaged 2 weeks ago, we can do that in a Christ-like manner. And what I talked about 2 weeks ago was how Christians are too sheltered. And I encourage us to be engaged in the culture in a way that we impact the culture for good. So we must be a model of Christ's love and grace in all the arenas of life. In that sermon 2 weeks ago, I reminded you that for many centuries, Christians shaped culture. Major contributions in the fields of education and literature and music and art and medicine and science and social justice, all by Christian thinkers and leaders. And government can be included in that. What's happened? Why have we gotten away from that? The new perception that we're encouraged, and each week we've been giving you the perception and a new perception that we're striving for. The new perception is this: that Christians are characterized by respecting people, thinking biblically, and finding solutions to complex issues. So no matter which side of the aisle you're on, we can be characterized by respecting others and working towards solutions. There are things that we can all agree on. Fixing roads and bridges, seeking peace in our world, helping the poor. No more shots of Taylor Swift during football games. I mean, these are things we can unite around, right? It's important to have a biblical worldview. Without it, our efforts to engage politically lack an appropriate foundation. So I'm not here today asking anyone to change their principles to accommodate those who disagree with us. I'm asking you to ask yourself this question. Is our political engagement Christ-like? Is our political engagement Christ-like? Are we engaged in the right ways for the right reasons? Are we part of the problem or are we part of the solution? Many non-Christians certainly believe we have the right to be engaged in politics, but what they struggle with are our methods and our attitudes. They think that we often pursue an agenda that benefits only ourselves. They think that we often care more about issues than about our faith. They wonder if we use Jesus as a prop only when it's convenient. So let us strive to be Christ-like. Let us strive to be clear in our positions when we engage politically so that we are not pushing people away from the faith. Let us be cautious not to place too much emphasis on politics. Let us not gain the world and forfeit our own souls. And above all, let us be people of prayer. That was Paul's advice to Timothy, addressing this topic with him. And in his first letter to Timothy, chapter 2, verse 2, he says, "Pray this way for kings and all who are in authority so that we can live peaceful and quiet lives marked by godliness and dignity." Sounds to me like Paul was reiterating what was said in the Old Testament in 2 Chronicles 7:14. "Then if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sins and restore their land." Pray. We can always pray. So, if we look back at the original perception, it says there that the outsiders think of us as primarily motivated by political goals. Primarily motivated. They don't see us as motivated by our commitment to Jesus, but motivated by politics and our passion for politics. If we're going to change the narrative, that must change. If politics is the primary motivation of our lives, we need to pause and step back and focus on the one thing. Well, what is the one thing? Well, you remember the story of Mary and Martha? And Mary is sitting and worshiping at the feet of Jesus, and Martha's getting ready for dinner, preparing all these things, doing all these preparations. And Martha comes to Jesus and complains to him that she's doing all the work and Mary's just sitting there. And what does Jesus say? Jesus says to Martha, "There is only one thing worth being concerned about." One thing. And in that instance, Mary was doing the one thing that was important. It was worshiping at the feet of Jesus. But throughout the Bible, we see people understanding the importance of one thing. For King David, he wrote about it in Psalm 27. He said, "One thing I ask from the Lord, this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life." One thing. Paul also knew the importance of focusing on one thing. He writes to the Philippian church, "No, dear brothers and sisters, I have not achieved it, but I focus on this one thing. Forgetting the past and looking forward to what lies ahead, I press on to reach the end of the race and receive the heavenly prize for which God, through Jesus Christ, is calling us." What is our one thing? May I suggest that when it comes to facing the stereotypes that we are labeled with, that our one thing is to love others with the love of Jesus. How do we change the narrative? Loving others. So think back on this series. When they think we're hypocrites, we can love them by being honest about our struggles. When they think we're too evangelical, we can love them by being friends first. When they think that we're homophobic, we can love all people with an unconditional love. When they think that we're being sheltered, we can love them by engaging with their culture. When they think we are being judgmental, we can love them by showing God's grace. And when they think we're being too political, we can love them by respecting their opinions. When it comes to stereotypes, one thing can change the narrative: love. And if we succeed, then they'll know that we are Christians by our love.